The main things that I always try to start off our groups with the three things that you need to have and be able to do is one, a basic procedure or plan of attack. This is what we're taking in. The first thing, how do you take an approach them? Okay, in our last session we took and gave a procedure. The second thing that you have to be able to do is have the knowledge to put that procedure to use. Okay, that's what we're taking and dealing with today. We're dealing with a simplified approach to form and structure. Now, the thing that you try to do is first realize that when you are drawing from a model, you aren't copying the model. What you're doing is you're taking and analyzing that model and trying to find a ways to take and communicate this thing. Now, what we do is we use a system of simplified forms, synthetic forms, we usually refer to it as. And the basic element that we work with is the sphere. Now, when you take and start, we try to take and break the model down into very, very, very simplified volumes and masses, whether they're spheres, boxes, something that the mind can easily perceive. Because what we're trying to do is to communicate. Well, again, and repeating again, we're not copying. We're trying to take and analyze and communicate what the model is doing. So now, taking a look at Jan here, we're just going to take and go through the figure from top to bottom. Now, the simplest thing that we all know and deal with is starting with the head. Okay, the head, first of all, everyone is very familiar with using the idea of a simple sphere to take and indicate the head. Okay, now the difficulty that everybody does this, but everyone doesn't have the sense of this as being a volume. You have to be able to continually be thinking in the round, that this sphere is a round form, that we take and have something that is tangible. Now, the head is really not an oval. Obviously, it's got things. Let's take and turn this sideways, Jan. Okay, now a little bit more this way. Okay, great. Now, the problem when taking and looking at the head in profile is that we tend to, if we start out with this oval, we don't have enough room for the basic skull, what happens onto the back. You have to first realize that the head is practically as wide as it is high. So the first thing we'd have to take into consideration is the fact that the head has an awful lot of volume behind. And in fact, what we try to do is to realize that this mass is really the important part. If you took and look at a child's head, a baby, we would take and see that the skull, the cranium area is the big part, then that the face basically is just something that hangs on that. We take and feel the cheek coming out here, the nose takes and sticks out, and the jaw actually is something that's very, very, very small like this. So the face part is just a very, very small part on a child. Okay, as we get older and develop, the face takes and continually drops down. The chin keeps going out, the nose straightens out, what have you. So that if we begin then in understanding the structure, we think of this big volume here with the face hanging from it. Now, you should try to get in the habit of not continually drawing things in straight front view or straight profile. Try to start seeing things in sort of a three-quarter view, like, okay, what I've done here or what I've done, I started here. Like, okay, this is basically sort of a three-quarter. So that, Jan, would you take and maybe let's turn and face that way, more three-quarter, okay. So that you can take and start to see that in here now we start to feel that mass of the head behind that simple volume. So we've got a spatial thing, okay, basic, simplified structure. Now, in breaking the head down farther, we take and deal with planes. Now, obviously, there's no real, we don't have really a lot of, the head isn't made out of a box. We don't have really hard corners, but there is definitely a front and a side. So that we take and start to see that across the forehead, we have basically one large plane. We have a side to the head, like this. And more than anything, this becomes a tool to help you analyze what these masses are, the head are. All of these things are a means of taking and allowing you to understand what is going on. The nose really becomes nothing more than a cone, or I should say a triangle that's sticking out here, sticking into the eye socket. We have a plane that sits down through here. We have another basic plane that takes and comes down through the front. Okay. Now this is probably the most simplest and most universal breakdown of the head. Now as we start working through this, we start to see that the neck now is essentially a cylindrical type form. And this is, I find, one of the hardest things for the student to take and grasp. Now let me take and, I'll just work down here. Okay, the fact that the neck, first of all, is a cylinder that takes and tilts back. We're looking at it, let's take in profile. Jan, look, okay, a little bit farther over. Okay, if you notice the head now, the neck here, we see that the angle of the head is tilting, the neck is tilting forward. That the back of the neck is considerably higher than the pit of the neck. Okay. Now, looking at this thing in three-quarter view, what we see, now turn up more this way. Okay, great. Okay, blocking in the head real simply again now. Feel the volume, the mass. Okay. The thing that we try to, as I'm drawing this, I'm trying to emphasize that it is a cylinder by drawing through it to feel this round form going down. Okay, now it's very difficult to just deal with the head and the neck by itself. We have to take it and deal with it in relationship to the rest of the torso. Let me take Okay, now I'm just going to take and jump around a little bit. First I want to go back or go ahead a little bit and jump into the torso, and then we'll come back and attach the neck to it. The rib cage area is essentially egg-shaped. Now, in the beginning, I find it's much more useful to approach the figure from seeing these simple volumes rather than trying to take and delineate all kinds of bones and muscles. First, see simple volumes. Okay. The neck fits into this mass like this. The head then fits on top of this form. So what you're seeing, these round, we could approach the figure as thinking of it like it's made out of glass. So this is fitting in the center of the rib cage, comes down, sternum, thoracic arch. Okay. Now, because you get here, you get the basic idea of how this is fitting in. Now, I'm going to take and start approaching the total figure, the total torso here. Is that you see the torso, and this is it's a hard thing to do. We first try to understand it as a volume. Obviously we think of rib cage. We've got a pelvic area in here, but what I don't try to draw rib cage and pelvis first. I try to see simple form. Try to see the rib cage as, and I jokingly do this in class all the time, although it's not really much of a joke. It's actually, I think it's sort of the basic beanism. The basic simple, what we're drawing is a basic bean type of shape. It's just very, very simple mass. Okay. From this, we find that we can take and do all the things that we need to do to take and try to communicate what's going on with the figure. First of all, the hard part, and which I started out with saying, that you have to be able to see this as a volume. You have to own this space. You have to be able to think completely around the form. Feel the mass. We feel around. Okay, with this basic sense here, it takes in, we see there's a rib cage inside here, and what you try to do is first start out by saying, okay, we have two balls inside of a gunny sack. Okay, now this gives you a simple handle to hold on to. In other words, we can take and practice thinking in terms of volumes, seeing these simple masses. From here, we take and modify it to saying, okay, the rib cage is not really a ball, it is more egg-shaped like I started with over here. And in fact, it's even a little bit more different than that. If we start out with a simple egg, we find out that the rib cage would be a little flatter on the sides. You know, it's got a hole cut out of the top of it, and it's got a hole cut out of the bottom. Okay, so it's not even really an egg shape, but for comprehension, we try to always keep it as simple as we can. So we say, okay, the rib cage is a simple, elongated, round, a little fatter on the bottom, and you're trying to visualize this thing as a total coming down. Now the pelvis is a very, very complicated form and tends to give most difficulty to people. Now, first, like I say, I'm okay seeing it as a round ball to begin with. Next, what we do is to try to visualize a box within this form. A simple rectangular form in here. Now, this is a tool for analyzing, so that you can take and look again. If we look at her pelvic area, you find that it's complicated. It's not easy to understand. We have to take and give us some kind of a hook to hold on to. So we start out with saying, okay, let's pick constants. We take and first we see, okay, there's the pelvic bones. We start to see, take a look at here. Okay, Jan, just straighten your legs first. Okay. You got the bone is sticking out here. The end of the iliac crest is here and here. So those are two constants. Then you have the pubic arch. So what we try to find is these corners of these simple forms, these landmarks that we can take and deal with. Okay. Now these become basically the corners of a box. We find, okay, this makes a very clear, definite front to side. Now in reality, the pelvis is more closely related to a couple of dishes, forms that take and do this type of thing. And the corner being out here, the end of the iliac crest, pubic arch being down in here, turning and going back behind. Okay, then the bones of the leg, the great trochanter sticking out on the side. So we have this curve. So when we take and we have a corner here, but what we really have is that the bone takes and curves up and pulls around back behind. Turn around, Jan. So these two dimples that you see back here are the ends of that pelvis, the arch of the pelvis taking and pulling around. So we take, as we're drawing this thing, say, okay, coming around, and I'm visualizing first a big, simple shape. It's say, okay, this is this round form in here. Now with this, I take and say, okay, now there's the bone that's sticking in here. I come out and I feel those landmarks. Try to look for this. Come down, pit of the neck, here. We've got the bottom of the sternum. We feel the corner of the rib cage coming around. So these are landmarks that we use. So we start to see the very, very simplified form. Okay, pubic arch here, and then obviously the center line that takes and works through. Now I want to take and do the back a little bit. Let's do a profile first, so we just get a little bit of a understanding. Now the taking the same idea, okay, very simplified. Just do this simple basic bean shape to give you a sense. And as you're doing this, you have to feel those masses that are actually inside that torso. Okay. Now, what happens is normally, as we stand, the pelvis is actually tilted forward. So if we were drawing this box of the pelvis, we would take and start to have something like this. The rib cage would be kicking and coming through, and the rib cage tilts the other way, and the spine is working through in here. Okay, we feel this arch of this coming through. Now, what you have in the back is you have two very, very, very large muscles that take and control or help hold together the pelvic area. It makes you stand up, hold the pelvic area and the rib cage together. Right? You can see these curves, this to this. These are your sacrospinilius muscles. Okay, the groove, of course, is where your spine comes down, goes back in, part of the S curve that takes place. But you feel these large masses, and if we had a cadaver here that was tearing apart, it would take both hands going around to grab hold of the spine and those muscles at the same time. So what we try to do is, understanding this basic structure, then you try to see this mass. We try first, and here I'm drawing just the spine. We try to feel these big muscles that are coming down and fitting into this rib cage here, and then pulling in and fitting into the pelvis. The dimples are sort of at where the base of the spine and the pelvis come together. But the important, and you get where the residual tail takes and cuts underneath. But these large forms are the basic sort of structure that we look at in talking about the rib cage to the pelvic area. Now, we start looking at the top part of the torso. We have the almost obvious thing, staying where you are there, and we'll go from the back to the front again. Okay, the scapula becomes the main element. Now, part of my logic in taking in, as you notice, what I'm doing that's different than you'll quite often see is that I don't include the shoulders at all in starting out. I'm dealing with just a simplified rib cage and a simplified mass for the pelvic area. Okay. Now, my reasoning for this is that the shoulders are things that take and move and are basically actually floating. They're not, the bones aren't actually attached like another joint. They're taking and floating over the surface of this rib cage. So, Jan, would you take and move your arms around a little bit there? Now, you can look at it and you can see, you can feel these things moving around, over, lift up, down. Okay, so as we're doing the drawing, I try to approach the drawing the same way, being always conscious of stresses and strains, the way things push and pull, so that we can build on top. Then we take you literally just draw the shape of a scapula, the line that comes across, feel this, and coming down, and the important part being to realize that the rib cage is round. If we looked at the rib cage from on top, we would see that it's like this. Very, very thick. We don't give enough credence to the fact of how thick, and that the rib cage is, the scapula is not sitting on the surface like this. It takes and is going around the edges of the rib cage. So it pulls over. In fact, from this three-quarter view that I've got right here, that scapula would be taking and going around, and all we would see would be the edge of the blade. And the arm coming up here. Okay. Now, here, now we can take and add the neck on. Think of the neck primarily as a cylinder and fitting into the head. Okay, now let's carry this down a little farther. We said, okay, we've been talking about the discs of the pelvis. Okay, the buttocks take in a big part. And when you look at the rear end, you don't normally just see this. What you see is a much bigger kind of shape that takes place. Now, this is where we have to take in, you really start becoming more abstract. In fact, it's good to point out now that what we're doing is basically is very abstract, because I'm asking you to take and see something that you're looking at and retranslating it. You're not copying. None of the lines that I am drawing here are real lines that I see when I look at the model. I'm taking that model and I'm changing it. I'm making it into a series of symbols that I have taken and learned. Okay, so as we start to work with this, we have to take and continually be analyzing it and changing it. So now when we look at this buttocks area, we find that it becomes useful to us to see it as we were looking at it from the front, to see it as that basic box type of form. So that we have a corner. Now, Jan, would you take and just hold with your sort of feet even? Okay, something like that. Okay, that's great. So what we can take and say, okay, there's a definite corner across the back of the buttocks. We feel there's a shelf going on underneath. And we could start to take and do something like this. Now, I'm doing a couple things here. I'm taking and not only talking about the fact that the pelvis tilts, but I am giving a bit of the actual angle in here of the way the buttocks takes and wraps around. But the idea is to see this. Now, obviously, her gluteus maximus, minimus, and medius is not square. It's round. So we're taking about these very simple forms, pulling in, and as you notice that I'm being anatomical, but I'm not being anatomical. I'm being almost more geometric than I am anything else. Okay. Now, turning around from the front again, the hardest thing that people have in dealing with drawing this way, and it's like drawing from a mannequin, is that the connecting of one form to another. Okay, let's take, and we'll come back to this now. I'm going to jump up to dealing with the shoulders in the front. Well, let's take a change of paper here. Now you notice that as I keep doing these over again, you see how much of a formula I have taken and broken this down to. And that's what my first opening comment was. I was saying that you have to have basic and a system of approaching things. Now, the main thing, the system that we're talking about, in learning, having the knowledge, pumping the knowledge in, you know what it is that you're supposed to be looking for. You don't get lost by dealing with a lot of material that is essentially irrelevant to taking and trying to communicate a very, very basic kind of structure. Okay, now, the clavicle from the front attaches to the scapula. If we were to look at this from the top, say looking at a section of the rib cage, okay, half here. Okay, the pit of the neck is over here. Got the opening for where the neck fits in. The clavicle takes and comes around over this way. Okay, the scapula comes from the back, and as I said before, floats over the surface of the rib cage and comes out, and actually the clavicle fits into it, and it has a square edge out here. The point to remember is that what we're doing is creating sort of a yoke going around the neck. So if we see it here, you would take and feel fitting on the sternum here, the notch in here, the clavicle takes and pulls over and goes up into here. Okay. Same thing on the other side, pulls over, goes back here. Now, I'm not really trying to sit here and talk anatomy so much as I'm trying to get you to get a sense of how things function, how they start to work. We feel a scapula coming out over here. This is fitting into that. The shoulders fit, the bones come back, fit in here, and it comes out. What you need to do, though, is to be able to see this as a volume. We want to be able to look at that arm and say, this arm is a cylinder. This is a round, cylindrical type of form that is fitting into this. Now, I continually get questions, well, where does that exactly work? Where does that cylinder, how does this thing fit into that? Well, there's no absolute rule to this. You have to take and look at the model. Now, if we take, let's take, turn a little bit more facing this way. Now, take your right hand and sort of push it back a little bit. Okay. Now, there's all kinds of bumps and what have you start taking place. We see all of these things that are going on up here. But what we have to be able to visualize is to see this as a top, and there's a corner that goes on there. So we summarize the forms. So we take and look at this and say, all right, I want to see, this is basically a cylinder. I'm analyzing. It's like as if we were taking and working with clay. We would be taking and thinking of masses. So once we've got this started here, we start thinking, okay, this is a corner here. If I was drawing the other one, I could be able to start to see this is a cylinder. It's like making a mannequin. Okay, going back here. Now, the muscles in here, the pectoris muscles, take and pull from this. They take and they fit over and come across. So now, a very simplified type of thing. Now, what's important, you have to realize that the figure, it's flexible. It's all stretches and it pulls and it sags. Mine sags more than hers. But you try to feel the way things work. So, and if you understand mechanics, if you understand the mechanics on a thing, the way that, if you almost don't think of muscles, if you think of rubber tubing, so that, say, okay, Jan, take and raise your right arm up in the air. Okay, just like that. Now, if we took this arm here, like she's got it, okay, she's taken and raised it up. Okay, we'll take and complete this on our next little session here. I think we got enough to confuse you for a couple seconds here. Okay. Okay, continuing back on with our basic structure. Now, thinking now of this, everything having this sort of flexibility, this mobility. We want to see this arm as this cylindrical form that is pulling or is raised up here. Now we see the muscles of the chest here, the pectoris muscles. You want to, like I said, think of them almost as like inner tubes, something that is taking and pulling over and being continually concerned with the fact that you're drawing something that it's round. That as I take that line, I'm pulling it, it goes over that cylinder. So at the deltoid then coming up here, down. Now, what you also have to be very conscious of where things can attach. Now, obviously, if we take, let's put the arm down for a second, Jan, that we see this area as a cylinder coming out and going down in here. The pectoris muscles taking and fitting over to this. the deltoid, or the clavicle, first of all, coming around over here, and you can see, get the model here, that this clavicle pulls over, and that is the point where it attaches into the scapula bone coming across through here. Okay. The deltoid comes over halfway. It doesn't come up to the neck, it attaches across that surface. So this cylinder has its limitations, so that when the arm is raised up, that these muscles, everything are pinching, raise your arm, are pinching down in here. We see this pull, we see the clavicle taking and tucking in behind, and we see a bit of the trapezius back behind. But muscles aren't the important part. They're the simplified structure, simple masses. Now, that scapula from the back has taken and pulled out a little bit. So now we try to see this pulling out, and we can feel that arm fitting down and in. And we get the sense of the rib cage pulling, going through. We always try to see. So now you can start to see my logic a little bit about why I begin with this very, very simplified shape of the rib cage rather than taking and trying to draw a big box with the shoulders, because these things are changeable. They move around, they flow. So we take in the other arm now. We see the shape pulling around. We feel this muscle taking and pulling over and attaching into here. We feel the trapezius muscle coming down. We would take and try to see the top of this mass. And now also I'm just taking in here and dealing with line. I'm not really even, I don't even think of this as drawing so much. It's just an analysis. It's a comprehension of what the structure is doing. Now, as we go into the arm, we see that this is, again, it's a cylinder. It's taking and pulling down. And the forearm, basically, it's the same thing. It's a cylinder taking and coming down. And go out of great pains to take and show what directions, by taking and drawing over that surface to make sure that you know, as you're drawing, which way that form is going. Now, obviously, we have to take into consideration what the breasts are doing. Now, they are simply, basically, round, spherical forms, round masses that are fitting onto that surface. It's their volumes. Now, you have to take and, depending on what the pose is doing. Now, if Jan was taking, let's see if we can do this. I don't know. Okay, let's see if you can just really arch back. Something like that. Okay, but turn a little bit more like that. Okay. Now, her swimsuit top there takes and does a little bit of it. What I want to trying to think about here to communicate is that when you're drawing, say, something like this, that you want to make everything correspond to the large masses so that we feel that these breasts are going over and fitting onto that rib cage. So these are the simple basic structure, and depending on the condition that one is in, you would have more or less fitting to the rib cage. Okay? Let's take and okay, now let's take and start working down into the legs. Now this usually gives the beginner the biggest difficulty when you're trying to simplify, because everybody says, well, you know, where do I put that cylinder to take and show how that leg takes and comes out? Well, first of all, remember what you're doing is you're not copying the model, you're trying to take and communicate something that's going on. So we have to take and understand. You have knowledge is the basis of everything. So let's take the pelvis now. We could say, okay, first, it's sort of a box type of mass. Okay, well, we've already stated it's not really a box. Okay, what we really have is a series of discs that are fitting inside this mass, the spine taking and coming down, pulling through the pubic arch down in here. Okay. The front of that pelvis is inside the edge of the box. So we look at it straight from the front. We would find that the actual corner of the pelvis is someplace over here, and here pubic arch is down in here. And the actual pelvis is even lower. But what we see, and what you have now is you have actually you have forms that take and tie from the end of the pelvis down to the pubic arch. You have pulling through here, and you have muscles that take and, well, we have first for the leg, the great trochanter, come through here, and this taking and pulling down. You have muscles that pull over that surface. You have muscles that pull over here. You have the buttocks muscles showing from the front, pulling back behind. But the important part is that the way it connects is that you have in here a distance. Now, if we look at Jan here, you see that the corner of the pelvis is here, whoop, right there. Okay, the leg actually appears to be stopping in here. You have a distance between here and here. This distance that you've got in here is created by the way the muscles take and attach inside. So that if we draw this in profile, turn sideways. Turn, face more this way. Okay. So we have, okay, pelvis here, the trochanter, the buttocks would be taking and coming down in here. The muscles, let's first draw this bone out here, like this. These muscles that take and create the leg take and pull and attach inside here. They do not attach to the pelvis. We have muscles that come down here and cut down on the other side. The buttocks muscles come down here. So you have this gap, this distance in here that takes place. And all the creases and stuff and folding that takes place in this point in here, at this spot right here. So take and lift your leg up there if you can hold it. Okay, so you can start to see pretty much where her strap is. You're getting a curve taking place. The pelvis is up here, getting this curve taking place through here. Okay, now the buttocks take and come down and sort of fit in this way, and get the leg coming down through here. So now when we're drawing this from the front, or let's take sort of a three-quarter front, let's turn a little bit more this way, a little bit more. Okay, camera will get this. Okay, think of the pelvis, think coming down to the pubic arch, pulling around, simplified, very, very, again, try to see that base of that pelvis as being just this very, very simple form. Buttocks coming around, okay. Then you have in here, pull through, we try to see this. This is something that takes and attaches and pulls on, okay. So this basically becomes your line. Now, there is no real line on her there. We might pick up a little folds in here. If the leg is bent up like this, we might get a crease here. But in reality, there's no line on her. Okay. Now, we try. This is where we take and connect. This is where we connect. We try to see these simple volumes. We would here, in this case, we would pick up a little bit of the buttocks behind, and we start to see here. Now, in going down farther, we find now that the knee, first consideration, the leg itself, first consideration is to see this as a cylinder. Now this becomes really useful when you're taking and just blocking in a figure. As my last session we talked about, having a procedural approach to the drawing where we took and laid everything in. Well, we did it basically working with these kind of cylinders. We looked at the Michelangelo. There was an analysis of how he did it. So that if a person was seated, we'd have that very, very simplified form, like a pelvis, and we would start by blocking in and saying, okay, where it attaches back here, where the end of the knee is, where the foot would be, and then basically laying in very, very simplified shape. And it isn't that difficult. It's just the difficulty is in forcing yourself to be able to analyze what is there. It's mental. Okay. Now, you find that it is, once you get to this point, the next step in breaking this down is to start to see the leg or the knee area as being basically a squarish form. Now, we can take a look the way, you can see this is obviously round, but as we come down to where the end of the bone is here, where the patella is sticking out on the end, it's very square. It's a very nice, clean corner to it. So I can take and Let's take and shift your weight onto the other leg. If you can see if you can hold that out a little bit. Okay. Now I've got a little bit more of a shift here, but it doesn't matter. Okay. We can take and see this. Try to see it as a very simple mass. Okay, coming down the corner of the form. Okay. And the same thing, we take and we come coming down. First it's a cylinder. We try to see, get a length, width, pulling down, and then we try to feel, okay, where is the end of that bone? Now, you have to be careful here that don't confuse the end of the patella or the end of the knee up here as being the thickness of the leg, because the knee area is considerably thicker. This is just the little bone that sits out on the end. Okay, but the thick of this mass. Okay. Then we would be coming down, again, thinking of the ankle. We would see first as a volume, where it's going, and a simplified mass pulling down. Okay, now let's even make this simpler. Jan, how about a perfect profile there? Just turn a little bit this more. Okay, that's great. Now, what you want to do is to take and analyze the form into a series of sort of cliches. Okay, we take. Okay, let's go all the way back, and we'll take a look at the sort of the basic rhythm of the way a figure takes in stance. We see the head, the neck coming down. We feel the rib cage tilts forward. The flow. In the female, the pelvis tilts a bit more. The male is actually straighter. But you have the famous sort of S curve that is talked about quite a bit. Okay, now with the legs fitting in, now the thing is to try to see the legs as a series of straights and curves. If we look at the back of the leg, we take, and again, you have to simplify. You see a simple straight coming down to the knee. The front is a curve coming through this way. Okay, this to here to here. Now, again, in the front, we try to see the front of the lower part of the leg as essentially a straight, the back part of the leg as being curved. Okay, and we try to feel this curve actually pulling in to the feet. Okay, so now you're looking at this and you say, well, it's a rhythm. And we try to feel, okay, this comes through, we can feel that pulling into here, feel that pulling into here. We have straight against a curve, straight against a curve. And you start developing a simple system for seeing what is there and being able to put it down very quickly. The foot, as you can see very simply here, I'm basically drawing it so far as just simply a triangle. Now, let's turn around and look at the front part of the leg. Okay, turn, face that way. A little bit more here. Okay, now straight, flat foot. Okay. Now we look at the front of the leg, and same thing. First, simple straight. The tendency is to exaggerate too much all the ins and the outs. You want to see basically a very, very simple form. Okay? Feel the outside sort of curves in, the inside basically relatively straight. The knee is not that narrow. It is rather wide. The tendency is to exaggerate the narrowness. Okay? Now, the lower part of the leg is, we look at highs and lows. We look at the fact that the calf of the leg from the front is high on the outside and low on the inside. Okay, feel the shin bone coming down there. Okay, the ankle is just the reverse. We see the inside of the ankle is high, the outside of the ankle is low. A very, very simplified structure. And here we actually is full, and we start to feel where the sartorius muscle would be coming down here, the tensor coming across. But here, the pubic arch. Very, very simplified form. Now, when we start getting into the feet, this always becomes a problem. The first thing that you have to deal with is how do you attach feet to the legs? Okay, let's draw this a little larger scale. Now, one of the best ways of doing this, of course, is to take and start looking at your own feet. Everybody's got mirrors and everybody's got feet. Well, almost everybody's got feet. Okay. Take and look here. Okay, the first thing, realize this. Then we want to see how this fits in. We feel that the foot is fitting in here. Now, one of the useful ways of learning this is to analyze a lot of the old master drawings. Look at the cliches that they took and developed. Look at a lot of the illustrators. You know. Okay, now, the inside of the foot is straight. The outside of the foot pushes out. The big toe area comes out. And I'm just sort of forgetting the toes here for a second. We feel this large sort of mass in here. Looking at it, turning it a little bit of an angle, you want to see this. Okay, we see. And again, here I'll just breaking it down a little bit in terms of mass here. We feel this coming down. Feel three-quarter view. We want to feel this is pulling out this way. We feel that ankle bone fitting over and actually draw that connection. It's coming down. And the toes would be pulling out of here. Okay, we want to feel that the fact that across the top here is sort of square. We have a definite corner at the top of the arch. This comes down. Now in profile, we see that point up here is actually about halfway between the toes and the end of the heels, coming out this way. And notice that the heel sticks out in back. Now, again, the most useful device I found for drawing, thinking about this foot and drawing it, is to be conscious of how the bone fits in. We want to see this area. Okay, the outside, look at the outside of the foot. We feel the small bone coming down, and we feel the large bone taking and sitting on top. We feel the bones in here of the foot is something like this. And instead of taking and drawing all of these little bones here, the metacarpal bones up here, I take and group these in terms of one simple large mass so that you can see this. But it's useful, without getting overly anatomical, is to understand why we have a bump. From here, the bones of the foot come out. So you start thinking, if this is a corner here, we have a corner where the heel comes down. You have your Achilles tendon taking and pulling, attaching to this. So this takes and pulls down, comes in. So you've got this landmark, you've got this landmark here, and then we start coming out. Now, the next big thing that you have to deal with is the fact that the foot, let's take and, yeah, you haven't got too much fatty feet. Well, turn, let's put your right one, left one back. Put your left one back, okay. Take and turn this around, look at a little bit of different angle. Is that, okay, I've talked about the bone here, a little bit here. The muscles of the leg take and pull like this, come down to the toes. Okay, they come down, we have the muscles in the back of the leg come down to the heel. So this bone is in here, like this, like this. So these are ramping, they're pulling down and attaching to each one of the toes. The ankle bone is here. This is coming down and attaching down in here. The next thing that you have to think about is the most characteristic thing that everybody draws cartoons of, thinks about, is the pad of the foot. The pad of the foot, it takes up this tremendous amount of space. When you look at where the bone, and again, I'm not for the sake of being anatomical about this, is just to be aware. Now, knowledge, you've got to have knowledge to be able to draw. You have to know what something is before you can draw it. Okay, you have to realize that this pad is this big mass that takes in fitting on here. If you just think about it, if you didn't have that pad in there, you would be, your bones would shatter from just banging them on the cement all day long. You've got this volume, and the shape of those pads are basically that classic footsteps in sand. Toes, okay, this mass in here. Now, let's get a clean piece of paper here. Mass, we have to think in volume. Now let's take and do a 3/4 here. So now taking and looking at that foot again, let's take, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we're running short here a little bit. You want to see in volumes. You want to feel these masses taking and coming out. Notice everything I do, I draw around and over surface. I want to feel this through here. Think of this coming out from behind. Pull. The toes themselves are really just cylinders that we take and pull up on. Okay. Feel the toes coming out. Okay. Basic masses, simple masses. Now I'm going to back up a little bit. We didn't really discuss too much about the calf area of the leg. Let's take and do a back view a little bit. Okay, and bend one of your legs. Okay, great. Okay, again, talking about that simplified structure. First, we're saying the leg is essentially a couple of cylinders. We feel volume going down, down, down. Here, the other one is going in. I really exaggerate. Feeling this cylinder going back, in, the bottom part here, taking and coming out. Okay. Volumes. But what you want to realize now is, again, it's mechanics. That to make this thing work, make the leg work, you have to take into consideration the way things attach. So these muscles in the bottom part of the leg here are fitting in. So the calf is this round mass that pulls down and attaches to the heel. Okay, it's round. So we draw over these surfaces as they take and go in. The upper part of the leg, these same thing. It's volume forms taking and going around and around. So you try to learn. You look at your anatomy books. You study. You take and you see tapes. You do everything you can to have knowledge, but the thing I'm trying to push is to approach this knowledge in some kind of a rational way that simplifies it, makes it into a system of analysis. Okay. Now, a quick moment here. Let's take and deal with the arms a little bit. Okay, Jan? Okay, we've talked about the shoulders. We've talked about the shoulders in here and how first we see them as cylinders taking and going down, where they're at. Okay. The next thing that you have to take and do is exactly what I was starting to do here with the legs, is that you have to become conscious of these masses. We take and try to see the fact, okay, we're taking a corner up here, try to feel that deltoid coming down and attaching. But more important right now is to have a sense of thicknesses of forms. The fact that this is sort of a type of form that does something like this. We want to feel it's sort of narrow up here and long on the side. Well, the biceps is just the opposite. It's taking and it's sort of narrower on this side and longer on that side. So we feel this one form wedging, is along Bridgman's terms, this wedging into this another form. Okay, the muscles of the arm are pulling and fitting into this. Okay, coming across, pulling down, come over that surface again. You're thinking around, pulling down. Okay, the wrist area is easiest, besides taking and seeing this as a cylinder to start with, is to see it as a squarish type form. As in fact, if you take and look at your hand, you feel there's a flat corner here, the muscles, the bones across here, it's flat, it's flat. It's very easy to start describing this as a square faceted type of thing. Now, let's take a couple of seconds here to just deal with the hands. Now, how are we going to do this? Let's just take, and what you want to do, okay, first of all, is to take, when you're looking at the hand, that the palm of the hand is larger than the top of the hand. Now if you take, I can just use my own hand here, if you look at this area here, if you take and put a pencil in here and turn it sideways, you'll see that this comes up between the two joints in here. We've got this point in here. So the palm of the hand is larger than the top of the hand. Okay, now in proportion-wise, the top of the hand, from the wrist to the end of the finger, the knuckle is halfway. Okay. Now, in terms of a simplified form in taking and drawing this, you try to see this as a mass. Now, this really takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of exercise to take and draw this. And what I try to do, get people to see this as almost like a glove without fingers. So I start to draw over form. Okay. Wrist coming down. Okay. Now, this actually drawing the hand, we can take and spend an hour on just dealing with the hand. Now, what I suggest you do is you take these basic ideas that I've been taking and dealing with and try to use them as an approach to analyzing the figure. Reduce everything down as much as you possibly can to very, very basic units. Don't complicate things. Don't get overly wrapped up with anatomy. Use anatomy for your own purposes.